Motors is adding more cars to its recall heap. This time, about 200,000 older Chevrolet Aveo cars.
A recall alert for anyone driving a GM SUV or pickup truck this afternoon. According to General Motors, it's recalling over 800,000 2021 to 2024 Chevy Silverado and GMC Sierra trucks, along with several full-size SUVs.
The headlines landed like a thunderclap. Nearly 900,000 trucks and SUVs recalled by General Motors. These weren't just any vehicles. They were the Silverado and Sierra pickups, along with full-size SUVs that had become staples in American driveways and job sites. For decades, GM's marketing machine built these trucks into icons of toughness, the kind of vehicles families passed down through generations. But in early 2025, that carefully crafted image collapsed under the weight of a single recall notice. What made this announcement so explosive wasn't just the size of the recall, though that number alone staggered the industry. It was what the recall represented: a breach of trust. A moment when America's most dependable machines were revealed as vulnerable and flawed. These trucks weren't being called back for a minor software glitch or a cosmetic defect. Their very hearts, the engines, were prone to sudden failure. Without warning, a driver could lose power on a highway, with children in the backseat and 18-wheelers rushing past at 70 miles per hour. This wasn't just about vehicles. It was about lives, livelihoods, and the thin line between control and chaos on the road. Regulators had no choice but to act. Lawsuits began to multiply, and angry owners flooded dealerships, demanding answers. Suddenly, the company that had dominated the American pickup market faced a storm of scrutiny, lawsuits, and community outrage. The recall became a lens through which Americans saw more than faulty engines. They saw patterns of corporate decision-making, cost-cutting, and misplaced priorities. By the time the dust settles, this scandal could reshape not only GM's reputation, but also the way Americans think about the machines they trust most. Real quick, if you're into videos that cut through the noise and break things down clearly, go ahead and hit that like button. It helps more people find this. And if you're not subscribed yet, now's a good time. We've got more deep dives coming your way. Also, drop a comment and let me know what you think. I'd love to hear your take. Now onto the video. For millions of families, a GM truck was never just transportation, it was continuity. The Silverado in the driveway often sat next to an older version of itself, a silent reminder that these machines were supposed to last a lifetime. Fathers taught their sons to change oil under their hoods. Grandparents drove them to fishing trips. Dealers marketed them as companions, not just products. Dependability wasn't a feature. It was the brand's identity. That illusion cracked the moment. Stories of engine seizures spread across the country. To the uninitiated, a recall might sound like administrative paperwork, an inconvenience you schedule with your dealer, but the lived reality was terrifying. Picture the scene. You're cruising on the interstate, your kids singing in the backseat, when suddenly the steering stiffens, the brakes lose pressure, and the engine freezes. Behind you, a semi barrels forward, with no room to stop. That isn't an inconvenience. It's panic distilled into a split second. The betrayal went deeper than mechanical failure. Owners had poured tens of thousands of dollars into trucks marketed as reliable workhorses. Commercials showed them towing impossible loads, conquering mountain roads, and braving snowstorms with ease. To discover that these very vehicles could strand them without warning felt like betrayal on a personal level. Even more unsettling was the randomness. Failures weren't isolated to old, overworked trucks. Complaints piled up from owners whose vehicles had fewer than 30,000 miles, machines barely broken in. Some had already endured crashes. Others were lucky to escape with only close calls. The sense of invincibility once attached to the Silverado or Sierra was gone. In its place was a gnawing uncertainty. Could this truck betray me on the road tomorrow? That psychological damage mattered as much as the mechanical one. Dependability had been a cultural contract between GM and its customers, and contracts depend on trust. Once broken, it's nearly impossible to repair. What drivers once viewed as a family heirloom now look like a liability on four wheels. If the recall itself was shocking, General Motors' proposed fix turned outrage into fury. Owners expected decisive action, redesigned engines, replacements, or at the very least, a fix that matched the gravity of the problem. Instead, what they received felt more like a maintenance tip than a solution. Dealers were instructed to drain the existing 0W20 oil, replace it with a thicker 0W40 grade, swap the filter, and twist on a new oil cap labeled with the updated viscosity. That was it. On the surface, the technical explanation made sense. Heavier oil creates a stronger film between metal components, reducing friction and buying time for stressed bearings, but beneath that logic lay a bitter reality. Thicker oil was never a cure, only a delay. Once microscopic debris circulated through defective blocks, the damage was irreversible. Metal shards scarred bearings, and no viscosity change on Earth could undo it. For many owners, the new oil cap felt less like protection and more like a countdown timer. It stretched engines just long enough to limp past warranty coverage, ensuring that catastrophic failures would fall squarely on customers rather than the company. Engineers privately admitted what customers suspected: the so-called remedy merely delayed the inevitable. The irony was brutal. Trucks that had been marketed as best in class for fuel economy suddenly saw their efficiency drop, directly undercutting one of GM's selling points. Owners had purchased vehicles on promises of durability and mileage, only to be told to sacrifice performance in exchange for temporary safety. The reaction was swift. Online forums erupted with frustration. Mechanics called the fix a band-aid for a bullet wound. Owners described the experience of being handed a plastic cap as insulting, given the thousands they had invested. More troubling still, the solution raised darker questions. If this was the official fix, how much deeper did the problem really run? What did executives know, and when did they know it? This moment marked a turning point. The recall had already shattered confidence, but the oil cap deception transformed skepticism into full-blown anger. It wasn't just that engines were failing, it was that the remedy itself suggested a company more interested in protecting profits than protecting drivers. Behind every recall is data, and in this case, the numbers told a story that advertising never would. By early January of 2025, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration had logged over 40 detailed complaints of sudden engine failure across GM's full-size trucks and SUVs. These weren't vague grumblings about rough idle or minor leaks. There were explicit reports of trucks seizing without warning, often at highway speeds. Some drivers described near misses where only luck prevented a deadly crash. Others weren't as fortunate. Several collisions were linked to the failures, and at least a dozen injuries were confirmed. Investigators believed the true count was higher, since many owners never filed official complaints. Each new report carried the same haunting detail: no warning lights, no sputtering, no gradual decline. Engines simply locked up in an instant, leaving drivers helpless. The escalation was swift. Regulators opened a preliminary evaluation in January. By April, after reviewing mounting complaints and technical bulletins, they expanded the probe to cover nearly 900,000 vehicles. Within weeks, General Motors had no choice but to announce a recall and issue a stop sale order. For an automaker, that speed of escalation is rare. It signals that evidence was overwhelming. The failures weren't isolated incidents or fringe cases. They were systemic. What made the data so damning was the profile of the affected trucks. These weren't old workhorses beaten down by years of abuse. Many had fewer than 30,000 miles. Families who had just celebrated their new purchase suddenly realized their pride and joy could be a liability. In glossy commercials, the Silverado was indestructible, scaling mountains and powering through storms. But in government files, it was a hazard. The numbers didn't just reveal mechanical flaws, they revealed the gulf between marketing and reality. They turned loyalty into skepticism and left regulators no option but to force GM's hand. For customers, the growing complaint logs felt like proof that their fears weren't isolated. They were part of a much larger, darker story. If the recall felt shocking for longtime GM watchers, it also carried a grim familiarity. This wasn't the first time the company had been accused of concealing defects. Just 3 years earlier, in 2022, GM found itself in court over oil consumption problems tied to flawed piston and ring designs in certain V8 engines. The allegations were serious. Trucks were burning through a quart of oil every 1,000 miles, an unsustainable rate for vehicles marketed as durable and efficient. Internal documents revealed that engineers had flagged these flaws years earlier, but instead of redesigning the parts, executives approved a cheaper cleaning process. The gamble was simple. Stretch engine life just long enough to survive warranty coverage. Customers would pay the price later. When the case went to trial, jurors weren't convinced by GM's explanations. Damages soared into the hundreds of millions, but the real damage was reputational. The courtroom testimony painted a picture of a company willing to suppress engineering warnings in the name of cost savings. For many owners, that trial shattered illusions about corporate transparency. Fast forward to 2025, and the new recall didn't arrive in a vacuum. It arrived in the shadow of that courtroom. Memories of ignored warnings and cost-cutting gambles resurfaced immediately. Owners asked themselves, if executives ignored engineers before, why wouldn't they do it again? Oh! The parallels were undeniable. In both cases, engineers raised alarms. In both cases, management chose the cheaper path. And in both cases, customers bore the burden when engines failed. The recall wasn't just a mechanical problem. It was déjà vu, proof of a corporate culture that seemed to treat customers' safety as negotiable. This is why lawsuits erupted almost overnight after the recall was announced. Attorneys, who had already battled GM over oil consumption, saw a pattern too tempting to ignore. For them, the courtroom ghosts of 2022 provided the perfect precedent. Executives knew, executives gambled, and customers paid. The recall became not just a repair order, but an indictment of an entire decision-making philosophy. The most chilling part of the scandal lies in how small the defect really is. Engines aren't failing because of dramatic explosions or gaping cracks. They're failing because of imperfections so tiny they're invisible to the naked eye. Machining errors measured in thousandths of an inch. At GM's St. Catharines plant in Ontario, crankshafts and connecting rods produced between 2021 and 2022 carried these microscopic flaws. On a blueprint, the differences looked insignificant, but in practice, they were catastrophic. That hair-thin misalignment destroyed the delicate film of oil separating metal components. When that film collapsed, metal met metal. Bearings scarred, friction skyrocketed, and heat spread through the block until engines seized. The aftermath inside failed engines looked like forensic evidence of betrayal. Teardowns revealed oil pans, glittering with metal shards, rods fused to crankshafts, journals scored as though by sandpaper. These weren't old, battered engines at the end of their lives. Many came from trucks with fewer than 30,000 miles, vehicles still under warranty, vehicles buyers expected to hand down to their children. What makes the defect so unnerving is its randomness. A driver can't predict when failure will strike. It might happen on a quiet morning commute, on a crowded freeway, or while towing a trailer uphill. There's no gradual decline, no clear signal, just sudden silence from an engine that moments before felt unstoppable. This randomness erodes not only trust in GM, but also confidence in machinery itself. If a truck's fate can hinge on a flaw thinner than a human hair, what does dependability really mean? It means the family heirloom in the driveway is in reality a gamble. The cruel irony is that GM has long proven it knows how to build bulletproof engines. Its Corvette line, built under the same corporate umbrella, shows what's possible when cost is no object. But for working families and small businesses relying on their trucks, invisible flaws became ticking time bombs. The result is a chilling reminder that in the world of manufacturing, the smallest errors can create the largest disasters. The scandal becomes even harder to excuse when you look at what General Motors achieves in another corner of its lineup. The Chevrolet Corvette, a sports car legend, shares the same small block engine family as the Silverado and Sierra trucks now under recall. Yet while family pickups are seizing at highway speeds, Corvettes scream down racetracks at 6,000 revolutions per minute without fear of failure. The contrast couldn't be starker, and it raises a damning question. If GM can build bulletproof reliability into a sports car, why not into the trucks that working families depend on? The answer lies in corporate priorities. For the Corvette, no expense is spared. Forged steel rods, high-grade alloy crankshafts, and dry sump lubrication systems keep the engine reliable under brutal racing conditions. Engineers design it for redline punishment, cornering forces, and track abuse. The result is a machine that owners trust to perform even when pushed to extremes. Now compare that with GM's trucks. These vehicles rarely see 6,000 revolutions per minute, yet they fail under modest loads and everyday commutes. Instead of forged rods and racing-grade lubricants, Cost-cutting left them vulnerable. It is not a question of capability. GM clearly knows how to engineer indestructible powertrains. It is a question of will, of whether executives prioritize excellence or profit margins. This double standard stings because of who drives each vehicle. Corvette buyers tend to be wealthier customers indulging in performance dreams. Silverado and Sierra owners, by contrast, are contractors, farmers, small business operators, and families who rely on their trucks for daily survival. For the former, GM delivers perfection. For the latter, it cuts corners until engines collapse. The Corvette paradox is both proof and indictment. Proof that GM can deliver excellence when it chooses to, and indictment that it doesn't extend that same care to vehicles marketed as lifelines of dependability. For many customers, that realization cut deeper than the recall notice. It revealed that their suffering wasn't inevitable. It was a choice made in boardrooms. To understand GM's decisions, you have to step away from engineering and step into accounting. Inside corporations, repairs are often viewed not in terms of lives protected, but in terms of costs avoided. In the case of these defective engines, a full redesign of crankshafts and connecting rods would cost billions. By contrast, telling dealers to swap oil and install a new filler cap cost pennies. This is where the concept of the warranty clock comes into play. Executives weigh not only the cost of fixing a defect, but also the timing of when failures occur. If a cheap patch can extend engine life by another 10,000 or 20,000 miles, that often pushes catastrophic breakdowns beyond the warranty period. Once the clock runs out, responsibility shifts from company to customer. Toothless is chilling. Better to absorb minimal recall costs today and let owners shoulder repair bills tomorrow. Court documents from earlier lawsuits revealed that GM had explicitly debated these strategies before. Internal memos showed managers weighing whether certain fixes could stretch engines just far enough to avoid expensive recalls. It was never framed in terms of drivers stranded on highways. It was framed in terms of protecting quarterly profits. In practice, this strategy left families facing repair bills in the thousands. Engines that should have lasted hundreds of thousands of miles instead seized before 30,000. Yet because the failures often happened just outside warranty coverage, GM bore little financial burden. The burden shifted to the very customers who had trusted the brand's promises of reliability. But for executives, this arithmetic may have seemed logical. For owners, it felt like betrayal written into policy. Trucks that were supposed to be safe havens became traps, engineered not for longevity, but for survivability on a corporate balance sheet. It was a revelation that stripped away any lingering illusion of goodwill. GM wasn't just failing to protect customers. It was actively calculating how to ensure failures arrived on someone else's dime. When a recall of this scale erupts, the first line of contact isn't corporate headquarters, it's the local dealership. Almost overnight, service bays transformed from routine maintenance shops into crisis zones. Mechanics who usually rotated tires and changed brakes suddenly faced engines seizing without warning. Service writers struggled to explain fixes they barely believed in. The phones rang non-stop, customers demanded answers, and the guidance from GM, swap the oil and change the cap, sounded like an insult. Showroom floors, once gleaming with polished trucks and hopeful buyers, turned into battlegrounds. Stop sale orders froze inventory on lots, leaving dealers unable to move vehicles. Customers with deposits demanded refunds. Salespeople faced accusations that they had knowingly sold defective products, even though many had been blindsided themselves. Anger spilled across desks and counters, sometimes erupting into shouting matches. The chaos wasn't just about sales numbers. Dealerships occupy a unique role in communities. Many are family-owned businesses that sponsor youth sports teams, host holiday toy drives, and employ dozens of local workers. For years, they were the public face of GM's trust in small towns. Now they became the face of betrayal, caught in a crossfire they never chose. Each stalled sale represented thousands in lost revenue. Each angry customer strained relationships built over decades. For some dealerships, the scandal threatened their survival as much as it threatened GM's reputation. Employees felt torn, loyal to their community, yet forced to defend a corporate fix they didn't believe in. The ripple effects spread quickly. New mechanics reported burnout as they struggled to manage workloads that doubled overnight. Sales teams watched loyal customers walk off the lot into competitors' showrooms. And through it all, GM's message remained the same. Trust the oil cap solution. For many dealers, that was the final straw. They realized they weren't just selling trucks, they were selling promises. And when those promises crumbled, it wasn't executives in Detroit who faced the outrage. It was them, standing on showroom floors, looking neighbors in the eye, and trying to explain why a $70,000 truck came with a plastic cap as salvation. In the end, the most striking response didn't come from boardrooms, courtrooms, or Senate hearings. It came from the people behind the wheel. Faced with silence, half measures, and finger pointing, drivers began to organize. They typed VIN numbers into federal databases, compared maintenance logs, and documented every rattle and knock. Online forums became makeshift laboratories where strangers swapped oil analysis reports, searching for the glitter of metal shards. What started as fear transformed into fluency. Owners learned the language of compression readings and bore scope inspections. Advocacy groups sprang up with stubbornly simple demands. Extend warranties, buy back defective trucks, tell the full truth. They held meetings in church basements and union halls, helping neighbors file complaints and preserve evidence. For contractors and family haulers, these weren't hobbies, they were lifelines protecting livelihoods. The collective voice grew louder. What executives may have assumed would fade into background noise became a movement. Owners realized they weren't alone. Each story of failure added pressure. Each letter, each forum post, each news clip chipped away at the corporate narrative. The warranty clock might stretch failures beyond coverage, but it couldn't outlast a community that had learned how to be loud together. And so the scandal ends, not with a clean resolution, but with hardened resolve. Engines have failed. Trust has collapsed. Families have been left stranded. Yet out of the chaos, drivers discovered power in unity. They no longer waited for Detroit or Washington to dictate the terms of safety. They demanded it themselves. The fallout is only beginning. Lawsuits will wind through courts. Rivals will keep courting defectors. Politicians will keep staging hearings. But one truth is already clear. The illusion of invincibility is gone. The trucks once marketed as unbreakable are now reminders of fragility. And as keys turn in ignitions across the country, the question lingers in every driver's mind: will this machine carry me home or leave me stranded? Once again, thanks for watching this video. If you got something out of this, hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next one. And hey, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Agree, disagree, or something in between? I'd love to hear it.